everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here to film a recent reads video. So this is all of the books that I read in the month of January that I have not yet talked about or wrapped up. So let's just get to it. The first book that I want to talk about is The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. This was a book off my ancient TBR that I buddy read with Doris at sort of the middle of the month of January, beginning to the middle of the month of January. And this was, I don't know why I let it sit around on my ancient TBR for so long, because this was really good. Like, I had been worried that it would be boring or the language would be really, archaic and not, what I like, but it was none of those things. I found it a very compelling read. This is the story of Wang Lung, and he is a peasant in pre-revolutionary China. So like the end of the 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s. And he is fiercely connected to the land. He's very, very poor. In the beginning of the story, it's just him and his dad living in this like basically little shack. And we follow him as he gets married to a woman who has been a slave, a kitchen slave in a big house, a house of wealthy people. And we then follow Wang Lung and his wife Olan as they farm the land and they build a family. And it follows them through basically history over this time. So you learn about the backdrop of the history of China at this time, what life was like for the peasants. They never get involved in like the bigger political movements. It's always just, what's happening in their little sphere of the world. And I loved that view. There's so much here. It's specific to China that I learned about China at this time and what life was like for women in particular. Although this story is told from Wang Lung's point of view, because Olan is so important to his life, you really get to see what life is like for peasant women at this time. There's periods of hunger and starvation, and then the family begins to sort of, their lot in life begins to improve. And then what happens to them as that happens? What happens to Wang Lung as his circumstances improve financially, and what that does to his sort of social standing in the community and what he feels he deserves. And then his family grows and builds, and you see it's his entire life from the time that he gets married up until he's an old man, and the changes that he observes, the changes in his personal life and the changes in the life of the community and the country around him. And I thought it was very engaging and compelling read, and it made me want to read more about the history of China at this time period from different points of view, because this is very much from the view of a peasant. And I thought it was wonderful. And I know the criticisms of this book because Pearl Buck is not Chinese. She is a white woman that lived in China for most of her life. But I felt that she really did a wonderful job of sort of giving this overarching story of a person's life. And there's so many aspects to this that I think apply broadly to the peasant class everywhere in the world, right? Like the things that people who are in poverty and who are farmers and who are producing the food that a country uses to support itself on, those kind of things, what life was like for women at that time when they were responsible for not only giving birth to the children and raising the children, but also helping the husband bring in the crops and sow the crops and keep the house clean and cook all the food and get the water and all that stuff. I mean, that is true of many, many places in the world, not just China. So I thought this was a wonderful look at a particular period in history and a real eye-opener for me, and made me want to read more about China, which I did because, as you all know, I went on and read Wild Swans, which is an Own Voices look at the sort of an overlapping time period, because at that Wild Swans does cover, the grandmother story does cover the same period of time that we're talking about in The Good Earth. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this book. I think it is a really engaging and compelling read that, if you're interested in sort of a look at a particular time period, is really, really great. So I'm glad I read that. The next thing I finished was an audiobook called Eloquent Rage by Brittany Cooper. And I think the subtitle of this one is A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpowers. And I really love this book. I thought it was excellent on audiobook. The author reads it herself. And she is basically telling stories of her life, what it's been like to grow up as a Black woman in America, and to grow up as a person who's really good at school and intellectually engaged and is committed to succeeding in the academic realm. What that looks like when you're a Black woman who's committed to feminism, and committed to sort of being the best that you can be. But then what does that mean you give up on the other end? And she's reflecting a lot on her life now that she's in her 30s, things about, having children or not having children, being married or not being married, having relationships or long-term partnerships and what that might look like. And, a lot of what she talks about, even though I haven't had basically none of her life experiences, I totally could relate to what she was talking about. I think if you're a woman in today's society, a lot of what she talks about you can sort of connect with. She also talks a lot about her faith, her religious faith, and how that connects or doesn't connect with her academic pursuits and her view of the world and what she wants out of life. And I thought that was really interesting as well. I'm not a particularly religious person myself, but I thought her reflections on that were very interesting. And I just think that so many of us were raised to be the quote unquote good girl. And if you did well in school and followed the rules and, didn't have children too early, or didn't let yourself get pregnant before you got married, and all those kind of things, on the other end, everything was going to come to you, right? And that is such a false bill of goods. It's such a false bill of goods. And she really reflects on that well. And I thought, yeah, that's so great. And I really appreciated this book for those lessons and reflections that she discusses so well. I will warn you that if you are the kind of person who doesn't like a lot of curse words in your audiobooks, then probably don't go this route, because she is fairly profane. It didn't bother me at all. I appreciated her raw honesty, but if that's something that you don't like in your books, then probably give this one a miss. Then I read another book off my ancient TBR. I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and I buddy read this with Kim from Middle of the Book March. Now, you will remember, if you've been watching my channel for a while, that I read the biography of Sylvia Plath last year for the Book 2 prize called Red Comet by Heather Clark, and I did not like it. I thought it was too long and overly detailed, and I just was like, it was just too long. That's all I can say about it. And I had not read anything by Sylvia Plath at that point. And so a lot of it kind of was like, I didn't know why the author was including it in this biography. Like, I didn't know the importance of it. So The Bell Jar is fiction. It's I believe the only novel Sylvia Plath wrote before she passed away in her early 30s. I think she was 30 or 31 when she committed suicide. But she published this book right before that happened in the early 60s. And it is autobiographical. I would say this is autofiction. If I had to, if you were to tell me the definition of autofiction and you said this book was pictured beside the definition, I would totally believe you. Because everything that is discussed in this book, everything that happens to our main character, Esther Greenwood, in this book, is what happened to Sylvia Plath in her real life. So in this book, we're following, like I said, Esther Greenwood as she goes to New York City she's in college, and she has been picked to be an intern for Mademoiselle magazine in New York City for one summer to, write articles for them and with a bunch of other young women from around the country, basically. And they're all living in this hotel called the Amazon, which is really the Barbizon Hotel in New York City. And so she's experiencing sort of freedom and grown-up life for the first time outside of college, and she is thinking in her head and saying out loud everything she thinks about everybody she encounters. And all of the supposedly fictional people that she encounters in this book are people that were the real people that she encountered in her life. Her real boss, the real girls that she stayed with in the Barbizon Hotel, her real boyfriend, like all the people that she has given a different name to are actual people that she encountered. And all I could think of the whole time I was reading this is, oh girl, that is harsh that you put this out there on the page. So yeah, but the other thing I would say, beyond the shocking factor of the fact that she wrote this very autobiographical book that skewers everybody that she knows, is all of the things that she experiences. She's basically pushing back on this idea in the 1950s America that if you're a good girl, you're gonna, you might go to college and whatever, but your real end goal is to get married and have babies. And like, that's all girls from good families want out of life. And she doesn't want that. She does not want that. She doesn't know what she wants to do, but she knows that she wants it to be something intellectual. She either wants to be in academia, or she wants to be a writer, or something where she's going to use her brain for intellectual pursuits. Not that you don't use your brain when you're a mom. Please don't come at me for that. I'm a mom, so I know. But she's really pushing back on this idea of a white upper middle class perspective on what is a successful life for a young woman. And in the meantime, because of this pressure that she's feeling, she's experiencing a lot of mental health issues. And that's the second half of this book, is she has a breakdown and she ends up in a hospital for people who have had mental breakdowns, and they're doing treatment on her, and she's not happy. She's very not happy. And so the honest portrayal of what mental illness can be, I think, and it was as she experienced it, because these things happened to the real Sylvia Plath as well. And so that made this book for me just absolutely fascinating and riveting, because the whole time, like, oh yeah, that really happened to her. Or, oh yeah, that's really what these people are, the real people that she encountered in her real life. And yet also this bigger reflection on what it was like to be a woman in her social class. Granted, it's all about a white woman's experience, but it was still fascinating, and I think ahead of its time for when it was written. Don't go into this for beautiful writing. Sylvia Plath's a poet in real life, or it was a poet in real life, but this isn't poetically written necessarily. It's very straightforward, easy to read. It almost reads like YA. But I really enjoyed this. And I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much if I had not read Red Comet. So it actually makes me look back a little more favorably on my time spent reading Red Comet, because I think it gave me the context that I needed to really enjoy this novel. And I can see why this novel is read in high schools and colleges, because I think it still is a window into a certain period of time. And a lot of things, while a lot of things have changed, there are things that have not changed for what Sylvia Plath is laying down in this novel. So yeah, that's another area that gave me food for thought with this. So yeah, that was another successful read, and thank you, Kim, for reading that with me. We had a lot of really great discussions as we went through that. The next book was one that was not so successful. And that was a book off my recommended reading list for college-bound students, one of the last two that I have had left to read. This is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Now, I'm sure you all know the synopsis of what this book is about. We're following our orphan Jane Eyre, who is, her parents have died. She is under the care of her aunt, who does not like her, doesn't want anything to do with her. And so the first 150 pages of this novel are basically Jane growing up as a little kid in this household where nobody wants her, and then being shipped off to this awful boarding school where she almost starves to death or freezes to death. And then as she graduates from that boarding school, she's 18 years old, she gets a job as a governess. And that's when she finally meets Mr. Rochester, because it's his house that she goes to be a governess. And yeah, so this whole book is a morality tale. This is all, again, based on trying to tell a woman how she needs to behave, or otherwise bad things are going to happen to her. You either obey your guardians, or you get shipped off to a terrible boarding school. You obey your teachers at this terrible boarding school, or, you don't get any food and you get stuck in cold rooms and almost freeze to death. You go and become a governess, and, you don't get yourself involved with your boss who, because he's above you in station, and that is not, is not your place as the hired help to like aspire to be the romantic partner of your boss, blah, 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 blah. Also, too many words. Holy cow, Charlotte Bronte. Yeah, half of this would have been more than enough to tell the story of this doomed romance, I guess you could call it romance. But I will just tell you, and I'm just going to put that down because that book, this is a terrible copy of it. Rochester is not romantic. He's abusive. He's way too old for her at the time. And yuck. And I can't even talk about this book. It made me so angry. I disliked how it ended. I disliked being preached to throughout the book. I thought it was way too many words and too long. And yeah, so I know lots of you love Jane Eyre, and I'm sorry, but I just could not with that book. I just could not. I don't understand. If you want to read a romantic piece of fiction from the 1800s, read Jane Austen. It's so much better than that. Oh my God. So let's move on. And the last book I want to talk about for January is Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. This is a brief history of humankind. This book was, all over the place when it first came out. I don't even remember. It was first published in 2015. And I enjoyed this book, although again, I think it was too long. And I think that I've read quite a bit of stuff now about this topic of how humans evolved, the history of human development, the migrations of humans around the globe, and how that all worked out. I've read Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel. I read Christina Thompson's Sea People. I read Superior by Angela Singy, I can't remember that one, but I'll put it up here because I can't remember the author's name, Angela something. And there was another one, like 1491 and 1493. Those books covered a lot of this same information. So I think that was part of my problem with this book, was I've already read a lot in this topic. And so some of this felt like not new information to me. And I don't know, he just kind of gets off in the weeds sometimes too with his, he just goes off topic and kind of goes down into these descriptions of things that I thought were a little bit off topic and a little bit less interesting to me. Like there's awful lot of talk about different religions and the development of those religions, and that was not particularly interesting to me. What was interesting to me was this idea and the theme that sort of runs, the theme that sort of runs throughout this, of that so much of human society is based on fiction that we tell ourselves. So everything from our monetary system to our governments to our religions to whatever, like every organizing principle or framework that humans use to sort of have used to create civilization, or what we call civilization, are stories that we tell. And none of it is biological in nature. So therefore, none of it is like, it wasn't necessarily ever going to happen that way. It's just a matter of chance that these things have developed the way that they have. So, if you're worried about cryptocurrency right now and like, what is that as sort of a made up thing? Well, so is the dollar, and so is every monetary system that has ever happened. Is just a token that we use to exchange goods and services. Like, it's all, the only reason any of it works is because we've all agreed that it exists and that we're gonna go by it. Whether it's democracy or communism or socialism or, I'm going to pay you in an American dollar rather than a shell that I found on the beach. It only works because we've all bought in to the fiction that this is how it works. And that theme, I think, was super interesting to me, especially considering some of the stuff that I read last year, like the deficit myth that I read about how the American economic system works. This helped me sort of contextualize a lot of that information. So I appreciate this book for that. I do think Yuval Noah Harari is a good writer. I just wish that this book maybe was a little bit shorter, or maybe that I had read it first before I'd read all those other books, because I think I would have probably thought this was much more unique than I did reading it now. So yeah, good but not great is where I will leave this one. So yeah, that's my reading for the month of January. Everything else I've already talked about in other videos. I hope that you all found some great books to read in January, and I will talk to you later.